They stole my college fund for my sister's wedding, so I made them regret it. I worked my whole life for college. I had the grades, the scholarships, the future planned. Then my parents smiled and said, "Sorry, honey, but we need that money for Jessica's dream wedding." So I walked out. No more second best. No more sacrifices. 8 years later, I bought my dream home in cash. And when my family came crawling back, I gave them one final gift. A block number. Growing up, I always knew that my older sister, Jessica, was the favorite. It wasn't something my parents ever said outright, but their actions made it painfully obvious. She got the best of everything: new clothes, brand-name shoes, the latest gadgets. Meanwhile, I was left with hand-me-downs and whatever was left over. Stung, but I learned to live with it. What choice did I have? Despite this, I worked hard in school. I wasn't just aiming for good grades. I was fighting for a future I could control. College was my way out, my escape from always being second best. And when I got my acceptance letter, along with a partial scholarship, I felt like I had finally won. I remember running home that day, clutching the letter so tightly my hands ached. I could barely contain my excitement as I burst through the front door, expecting my parents to be just as thrilled. But the moment I told them, I could see it in their faces: disinterest, maybe even annoyance. "We can't pay for your college, Michelle," Mom said without even looking up from her magazine. I stood there, stunned. "What?" "But Grandma's money. It was meant for my education. You promised." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Things change, honey. Jessica's wedding is coming up, and we need the money for that. You'll figure something out." My heart sank. Jessica's wedding? That was more important than my future? I had worked my entire life for this moment, and they were throwing it away like it was nothing. I don't even remember how the argument started, only that it escalated fast. Years of being overlooked, a feeling like I was never enough, came crashing down in an explosion of anger and frustration. I yelled, they yelled back. Jessica, smug as ever, didn't even bother to defend me. That night I packed my bags. If I wasn't important to them, then I wasn't going to stick around and pretend like I was. I went to the only person who had ever truly been there for me, Aunt Sarah. She opened her door without hesitation and let me in. What I didn't know at the time was that Aunt Sarah had been saving for her own son's college education before he tragically passed away. And when she saw how desperate I was, she offered me that money. I refused at first, but she insisted, saying she wanted it to be used for something meaningful. I promised her that one day I would pay her back every single cent. With her help, I was able to enroll in college. It wasn't easy. I worked part-time shifts at a cafe to cover what the scholarship didn't, studied late into the night, and pushed through exhaustion just to keep going. But I made it. I graduated with my degree in investment management, landed a job at a top firm, and 2 years later I finally repaid Aunt Sarah in full. I had done it. I had built my life without my parents, without their support, without their money. And I was proud of it. For 8 years I had no contact with them. I told myself I didn't need them, that I was better off. And I believed it. Until the phone call that changed everything. Leaving home at 18 wasn't just an act of defiance. It was survival. After that explosive fight with my parents over college funds, I knew I couldn't stay under their roof another second. The betrayal of knowing my grandmother's savings, meant for my education, had been funneled into my sister's wedding was too much to bear. I had no place in that house anymore. I packed my bags that night, stuffing them with everything I could grab in a hurry, and called the one person who had always treated me with kindness, Aunt Sarah. She didn't even hesitate. "Come over, sweetheart. You'll always have a place here." With nothing but a backpack and my acceptance letter, I left my parents' house, leaving behind the life where I was always second best. Aunt Sarah's house wasn't a mansion, but it was warm. More importantly, it was safe. She welcomed me with open arms, never asking for anything in return. I had known she lost her only son years ago in a tragic accident, but what I didn't know was that she had been saving up for his college education. "I want you to use it," she told me one evening over dinner. "It was meant for education, and I know he'd want you to have the chance he never got." Tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't believe someone would do something so selfless for me, but I refused to take her money as a handout. "I'll pay you back," I promised. "Every single penny." College was nothing like the life my sister had. No luxury wedding, no doting parents funding her lifestyle. Instead, I juggled early morning classes and late-night shifts at a cafe, barely getting enough sleep. My scholarship covered part of my tuition, but the rest? That was on me. Some nights I came home so exhausted that I barely made it to my bed before passing out. But I refused to give up. I watched my classmates go on weekend trips, throw parties, live the carefree college life I had once dreamed of. But that wasn't my reality. While they were out, I was studying, grinding, making sure I was never in a position where I had to beg for help. The anger from my parents' betrayal never left me. If anything, it fueled me. I wanted to prove that I didn't need them, that I could make something of myself on my own. By the time graduation rolled around, I wasn't just walking across that stage with a diploma, I was walking away from my past. I landed a job at a prestigious investment firm right after school. And 2 years later, I did what I had promised. I paid Aunt Sarah back. Every single penny. She never expected me to, but I wanted to. She was the only one who had ever truly believed in me, and that meant more than I could ever put into words. Life was finally mine to control. I had built my own future, without my parents, without their money, and without their approval. And I didn't miss them. Not one bit. At least, not until that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. And that's when everything changed. For 8 years, I had managed to avoid my family completely. No calls, no texts, no unexpected visits, just silence. And honestly, it had been the best decision I ever made. So when Aunt Sarah invited me to Thanksgiving dinner, I never even considered the possibility that my parents and sister would be there. I arrived at her house, balancing a store-bought pumpkin pie in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. But the moment I stepped through the front door, I felt the air shift. Sitting in the living room as if they belonged there, were the very people I had cut out of my life, my parents and my sister Jessica. I froze in place, my heart hammering in my chest. 8 years of carefully constructed walls, and they had just crashed down in an instant. Aunt Sarah rushed toward me, her eyes filled with apology and concern. "I didn't know they were coming," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. "They just showed up." I nodded, my throat tight, my mind racing. Why now? Why, after all this time, were they suddenly here? Mom was the first to speak. "Michelle," she said, her voice cautious, almost hesitant. "It's been a long time." I clenched my jaw, gripping the pie tighter in my hands. "Yeah, it has," I replied, my voice devoid of any warmth. Dad gave me an awkward nod while Jessica sat there, smug as ever, 2 kids clinging to her side like accessories. I couldn't do this. Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked straight out the back door, gulping in the cold November air as if I had been suffocating inside. I gripped the railing of Aunt Sarah's porch, my knuckles turning white. I had imagined seeing them again a million times in my head, but never like this. Footsteps behind me. I stiffened. "Michelle, please." Mom's voice, softer than I ever remembered. "Can we talk?" I exhaled slowly, not turning around. 8 years of silence, and now you want to talk? She stepped closer. "Because we were wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father and we've spent years feeling guilty about what we did. We want to make things right." I let out a bitter laugh. "And yet, in all that time, not once did you try to reach out?" She sighed. "We were ashamed." I finally turned to face her. She looked older, more tired, her hands wringing together nervously. I didn't feel satisfaction, I just felt numb. "We kept telling ourselves we'd call," she continued. "But the more time passed, the harder it got. When we heard you'd be here for Thanksgiving, we knew it might be our only chance to see you." I stared at her, my mind a mess of emotions. A part of me wanted to yell, to remind her of every single time they had put Jessica first, every time they ignored me, every time they made me feel like I didn't matter. And yet, the exhaustion in her eyes, the desperation in her voice. I saw something I had never seen before. Regret. I swallowed hard. "I need time," I finally said. "This is a lot." She nodded quickly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready." I wasn't sure I ever would be. The rest of the evening was a blur. I barely ate, barely spoke, barely acknowledged them. And yet I couldn't ignore the way they kept looking at me, like they were trying to make up for lost time with silent apologies. It wasn't enough. But for the first time in years, I let myself wonder if things could be different. For 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I couldn't think about anything else. Every morning, I woke up replaying Mom's words on Aunt Sarah's porch. Every night, I lay awake wondering if I was making a mistake by even considering forgiveness. Was I being weak? Or was I just finally giving them a chance? One evening, I found myself staring at my phone. Mom's number was still saved. I had never deleted it. Maybe some part of me had always known this day would come. My finger hovered over the call button for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I took a deep breath and pressed it. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. Michelle. Mom's voice was soft, almost hesitant. I swallowed hard. Hi, Mom. My voice cracked slightly. I've been thinking about what you said at Thanksgiving. I'd like to try. A beat of silence. Then a sharp exhale, like she had been holding her breath. Oh, honey. Her voice wavered. That means so much. Thank you. The conversation was short, cautious. We agreed to start slow, maybe meet up soon. No pressure. No expectations. And that's how I found myself standing outside my childhood home a week later, clutching a bag of small gifts. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful things I knew they would appreciate. A soft scarf for Mom. A book Dad had once mentioned years ago. Educational toys for Jessica's kids. The house looked different. Smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling, and the once perfectly manicured garden had been overtaken by weeds. Before I could ring the doorbell, it swung open. Mom stood there, eyes red-rimmed, nervous but happy. You came. I nodded. I came. Stepping inside, I felt a wave of nostalgia and unease. The furniture was the same but worn down. The walls needed a fresh coat of paint. The once plush carpet was now thin and faded. They weren't doing as well as before. Dad emerged from the kitchen, looking uncertain but hopeful. Jessica stood nearby, her kids peeking out from behind her legs. I handed out the gifts, watching their reactions. Mom's eyes welled up at the scarf, her fingers running over the soft fabric. Dad actually smiled when he saw the book. Even Jessica looked a little taken aback by the toys for her kids. Over dinner, Mom had made lasagna, the same one I had loved as a kid. And little by little, the truth about their lives came out. Jessica's marriage had ended badly, forcing her to move back home. Mom had health issues that forced her to cut back to part-time work. Dad's company had downsized, leaving him with a lower-paying position. How about you, Michelle? Jessica finally asked, twirling her fork in her food. How's work? I kept my voice neutral. Good. I'm at Morton & Associates now. It's a large investment firm downtown. The rest of the evening was filled with careful small talk. No one wanted to say too much. No one wanted to push. We were all trying so hard to be normal, but it didn't quite feel real. Still, something had changed. For the first time in 8 years, we were sitting together talking, trying. And I wasn't sure what to do with that feeling. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. Jessica started showing up at my office during lunch breaks, always with 2 cups of coffee from the cafe downstairs. At first it was awkward small talk, catching up on trivial things. But slowly our conversations deepened. She told me about her failed marriage, how her ex-husband had been terrible with money and even worse with commitment. She admitted that moving back home had been humiliating, but she had no choice. For the first time in years, I saw her as a person, not just the golden child. By the time Christmas rolled around, I actually looked forward to spending it with them. But first, I had an important stop to make. I knocked on Aunt Sarah's door, holding a neatly wrapped gift. She opened it and laughed. A coffee maker, she said, pulling it from the box. Are you trying to tell me something about my instant coffee? I grinned. Maybe. She shook her head, then hugged me tight. Thank you, sweetheart. But tell me, are you happy with all this? I hesitated, then nodded. I think I am. Christmas at my parents' house was nothing like the first tense dinner. Mom had decorated every inch of the house, and Dad was actually singing carols while helping in the kitchen. Jessica's kids, Emily and Jack, had finally warmed up to me, especially after they saw their presents. Aunt Michelle, they squealed, climbing all over me. Can you help us build the volcano? Watching them play, I realized something. I had missed having a family. Even Mom and Dad seemed lighter, more relaxed. Months passed and we fell into a rhythm. Sunday dinners became a tradition. Jessica and I had our coffee dates. And then came the spring break trip. I hadn't planned it, it just happened. I overheard Mom sighing about how the kids had never seen the ocean. "Let's go," I said impulsively. "Next week. I'll book everything." The trip was magical. Watching Emily and Jack's faces light up when they saw the ocean for the first time. Hearing their squeals of joy as they ran into the waves. Building sandcastles with Dad like I used to as a kid. It was worth every penny. And after that, things felt even more natural. Which is why I wasn't entirely surprised when Mom and Dad asked to talk to me one evening after dinner. Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "The plumbing in the house," he started, avoiding my gaze. "It's bad," Mom finished, looking embarrassed. "We hate to ask, but we could really use some help." I didn't hesitate. I wrote them a check right there. It wasn't a small amount, but seeing their relief made it worth it. After that, the requests kept coming. Nothing too big. New winter boots for Jack, help with school supplies, a replacement microwave when the old one finally broke. It was family. That's what family does. Or at least that's what I told myself. It started subtly, so subtly that I didn't even notice at first. The small requests for help slowly became more frequent. First it was just the plumbing repairs. Then it was the water heater. Next came Emily's school supplies, followed by Jack's new shoes. I told myself it was normal. That's what family does, right? Then one Sunday dinner, Mom dropped a bombshell. She had been quieter than usual, picking at her food instead of eating. Finally, as Dad was serving dessert, she sighed heavily and looked up. "I lost my job." My fork paused midair. "They're cutting positions at the library," she continued, her voice cracking. "Mine's one of them." I looked at her shaking hands as she held her coffee cup. At the deep worry lines on Dad's face. For the first time they looked old. Vulnerable. "We don't know what we're going to do," she whispered. The medical bills, the house payments were barely scraping by. Before I could think, the words fell out of my mouth. "I can help." Dad looked up, his face flooded with relief. Mom started crying, but this time it wasn't from stress, it was from gratitude. I heard myself say it before I even fully processed it. "I can afford $1,500 a month. It's not a problem." The tension in the room melted away instantly. Mom let out a shaky laugh, wiping her tears. Dad got up and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. For the first time since we had reconnected, I felt like I truly belonged. And just like that, a new normal was established. Every month, without fail, I transferred $1,500 into their account. They never asked for more than we agreed upon. But every now and then, there were small extras. A broken washing machine. A special school trip for Emily. A sudden car repair. And every time I paid. Because that's what good daughters do, right? At least that's what I kept telling myself. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sunday dinners were routine, my relationship with Jessica felt stronger than ever, and the monthly transfers became just another bill to pay. Something I did without question. Then one afternoon everything changed. I was at home flipping through paint samples for my new apartment when Aunt Sarah called. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could tell something was wrong. "Michelle, can you come over? We need to talk. It's important." My stomach sank. Aunt Sarah was never dramatic, so for her to call me like this, it had to be serious. I rushed over. When I arrived, I found her pacing in her kitchen, her hands gripping a cold cup of coffee. She barely waited for me to sit down before blurting it out. "I heard something today. Something you need to know." I froze. "Linda and Karen were at book club," she started, then hesitated. "They were old family friends, women who had known us since I was a kid. They ran into your parents and Jessica at the grocery store last week," Aunt Sarah continued, her voice shaking with anger. I sat up straighter, my chest tightening. Apparently, after I started helping them financially, my family had been talking about me. A lot. "What do you mean, talking?" I asked. Something cold settled in my stomach. Aunt Sarah didn't sugarcoat it. "They've been calling you their personal ATM behind your back." I stared at her. "They've been joking about how they finally found a use for your fancy job," she said bitterly. My breath caught in my throat. Jessica had even been telling people that she just had to mention wanting to go somewhere, and I would pay for the whole trip. I felt sick. But Aunt Sarah wasn't finished. "There's more," she added, her voice softening. She hesitated, then finally said it. "Your mother has been bragging that she doesn't need to look for another job because you're good for the money." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "She's been laughing about it, Michelle. Making fun of how eager you are to help them." The world tilted sideways. I wanted to deny it, to tell Aunt Sarah that she must have misunderstood. But deep down I knew she wouldn't lie to me. And suddenly little things started making sense. The calculated looks my parents exchanged whenever money came up. The way they changed the subject when I mentioned work. The increasingly frequent requests, always small but always something. It had never been about rebuilding a family. It had been about my money. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Aunt Sarah reached for my hand. "I debated whether to tell you," she whispered. "But you deserve to know." I sat in stunned silence. Then slowly an idea began to form. If they saw me as nothing but an ATM, then maybe it was time to test that theory. 2 days later, I stood outside my parents' house with 2 packed suitcases. I had spent the morning moving my furniture into Aunt Sarah's garage, rehearsing every detail of what was about to happen. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell. Mom answered, her surprised expression quickly shifting to concern when she saw my bags. "Michelle? What are you doing here? What's with the suitcases?" Dad and Jessica appeared behind her, looking just as confused. "Perfect." I let my lower lip tremble, blinking rapidly as if holding back tears. "I got fired," I choked out. "There were budget cuts. And some mistakes in my work. They're making me pay back bonuses I can't afford." I took a shaky breath, lowering my voice. "I can't pay my rent anymore. I was hoping maybe I could stay here. Just for a few months. Until I get back on my feet." Silence. It lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Mom's concerned expression twisted into something ugly. "Does this mean you won't be sending us money anymore?" she demanded, all pretense of sympathy gone. Even though I had expected this, my heart still cracked a little. "No, Mom. I won't have any extra money for a while," I murmured. Jessica stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "What about our Europe trip next month?" she snapped. "The one you promised to take me on?" I lowered my gaze to the floor and shook my head. That was when all hell broke loose. "You stupid, irresponsible girl." Mom's screech made me flinch. "How could you let this happen? What kind of investment manager gets fired?" Dad's face turned red with rage. "We should have known you'd screw this up," he spat. "You always do. And now you want us to support you." Jessica stormed past me, grabbed my suitcases and dragged them outside like trash. "There's no room for you here," she hissed. "And I'm not sharing my space with a failure." I watched in stunned silence as my sister dumped my luggage on the porch. These were the same people who had hugged me at Christmas, who had cried grateful tears when I helped them, who had claimed to be so sorry for the past. And now, when I had nothing to offer, "We don't need you here without your money," Mom sneered. "You'll never get another decent job after being fired like this," Dad added with a smirk. "We're not supporting a deadbeat." I stood there, taking it all in. The masks had finally fallen, revealing the ugly truth beneath every family dinner. Every heartfelt apology, every reconciliation. Aunt Sarah had been right. Looking at them now, Mom's twisted expression, Dad's mocking smirk, Jessica's contemptuous sneer, I felt oddly calm. Something inside me that had been hanging by a thread finally snapped clean. Without a word, I turned and walked to my suitcases. Behind me, their voices rose in a chorus of insults. "Leech! Ungrateful brat! Don't come crawling back!" I wheeled my luggage down the driveway in silence, their shouts fading into the background. Neighbors peeked through their windows, but I didn't care. 20 minutes later, I was back at Aunt Sarah's house. She took one look at my face and opened her arms. I fell into them, finally letting the tears come. "They showed their true colors, didn't they?" she whispered, stroking my hair. I managed a weak smile, then pulled out my phone. First, I opened my banking app and canceled the monthly transfer to Mom's account. Then, I pulled up the travel website where I had booked Jessica's dream European vacation. 2 clicks, and both the hotel reservation and flight tickets were canceled. The next 2 weeks at Aunt Sarah's felt like a cocoon, a safe space to process everything. Then, something unexpected happened. My realtor called. "Michelle, remember that corner unit you loved?" she asked excitedly. "The sellers accepted your offer." Everything moved quickly after that. Paperwork, inspections, final walkthroughs. It all became a blur of signatures and meetings. Before I knew it, I was standing in my very own apartment, holding the keys in my trembling hands. Aunt Sarah helped me move in. We spent the weekend arranging furniture, hanging artwork, and making the space truly mine. She even insisted on helping me pick out new curtains for the floor-to-ceiling windows. That evening, after Aunt Sarah left, I did something impulsive. I took a photo of myself in my new living room, the city lights twinkling behind me through the massive windows. I posted it on social media with the caption, "Dreams do come true. Finally a homeowner. No mortgage. No loans. Just years of hard work paying off." I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew they would see it. And part of me wanted them to. Sure enough, my phone rang less than 2 hours later. Mom's number flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "What is this photo about?" she snapped. "What apartment? I thought you were fired." Settling into my new armchair, I felt surprisingly calm. "Actually, Mom," I said evenly, "I wasn't fired. I'm still employed, still successful, and now I'm a homeowner too." Silence. Then her voice rose an octave. "Test? What do you mean test?" "I wanted to see if you actually cared about me, or just my money," I said coolly. "I got my answer when you threw my suitcases out on the porch and called me a leech." The silence stretched, but I wasn't done. "Oh, and Jessica?" I added, smirking. "I canceled your tickets to Europe. I think I'll go by myself instead." The screaming on the other end of the line was instantaneous. Dad cursing, Jessica shrieking, Mom's voice turning sickeningly sweet. "Sweetheart, we were just shocked. Of course we care about you. We can move past this little joke of yours. Everything can go back to normal." I actually laughed out loud. "Normal?" I echoed. "You mean where I pay for everything while you mock me behind my back?" I let out a low chuckle. "Don't worry about a leech. You can pay your own bills." Then I hung up. Blocked their numbers. Blocked them on all social media. And just like that, I felt lighter than I had in years. They tried calling from different numbers. They sent emails. They even showed up at my office building, but security turned them away. And I felt nothing. No guilt. No sadness. Just relief. That weekend, Aunt Sarah came over for dinner in my new home. I had made her favorite lasagna, and we sat on the balcony, watching the sunset. "Are you okay?" she asked, refilling our wine glasses. I took a deep breath, looking around at everything I had built for myself. "I have everything I need right here," I said. "A home of my own, a job I love, and the only family member who ever truly mattered." Aunt Sarah clinked her glass against mine, and we sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below us. Sometimes I realized the family you choose is better than the family you're born into. And sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the most beautiful beginnings.